Details tonight on a twist in the search for a couple missing in the outback.
Jennie Kehlet went missing in the Goldfields near Sandstone. Her husband Raymond was found at the bottom of a 12-metre abandoned mine shaft, but Jennie had disappeared.
Any progress is good progress, and obviously the police have been busy with this in the background. Hopefully something comes of it.
At this point in time, we're not seeing anything that suggests criminality.
Are you serious?
Yes.
We've only got one side of the story.
We find Jennie, we will find out what happened.
It just doesn't happen out here. It's not normal behaviour.
Did you deliberately mislead the police about where you went with Ray and Jennie in Sandstone in March 2015?
No. It's not like them. They're experienced. They are not lost. Something terrible has happened.
I can hear it like it was yesterday. He actually said that's how you make a lie believable, is it's got a grain of truth.
It's easy in stories like these to lose sight of the people at the centre of them. They can become abstract characters in a tragic narrative, overshadowed by forensic detail, by the mystery, and by the horror. And in that, we sometimes forget these are real people. People defined by far more than the final chapter of their lives. Ray and Jennie Kehlet were a loving couple in the prime of their lives. They loved to laugh, they loved adventure, they loved their families, and they were deeply in love with each other. The joy they shared lives on through those who knew them and stands as a testament to who they were. Genuine, everyday people, deeply loved. In this season finale of Some Kind of Closure, we want to take a moment to step away from the details of the case and instead reflect on Ray and Jennie. To remember and to celebrate two lives well lived and well loved. In this episode, friends and family share memories and stories of a couple who left a lasting mark on so many. We begin with Jennie's daughter Kelly, as she shares some memories of her mum.
There is a question the interviews always start with. The question, if you will. Tell me about your mother. Tell me a bit about Jennie. How do you explain a person in a few words? How do you make it clear who they are to someone who only knows them through a lens of tragedy? What can I say about my mother in a concise, clear manner that builds a picture of who she really was? The question seems softball, but it's the hardest one to answer. So much feels at stake when I try and answer it. I want to be honest. I wanted people to see who she really was, but endearing tales need a greater context, which can't be given in a 30-second soundbite. I seem to fall back on the canned, generic responses that construct a blurry haze of a woman. It isn't incorrect. There are no lies, but it seems so superficial. Tell me about your mother. What is there to say? She was mum. The memories blend. Parents are a constancy in our life, a foundational pillar of who we are. It feels easier to define what life was like in her absence rather than determine how much of the world was shaped by her presence. She liked to clean on Saturday mornings. She would play loud music and sing, off-key, as she flew around the house, flitting from unfinished job to unfinished job like a jitty-jitty. When Cher came on, she'd sing extra loud, putting on the Cher voice to our delight. Like a bowerbird, Mum was drawn to certain objects and antiquities, building little nests that sparked joy. There was an old writing bureau she'd purchased when I was very small, made of dark wood with secret drawers. It was never used for writing, but it was always in the house. As kids, we'd joke about it being a magpie nest where delightful shiny trinkets were collected and stored. There was always an interesting thing to find in our house. Mum loved the old, the strange, the rusted pieces that told stories of different times. Tell us a bit about Jennie. She worked harder than anyone else I've ever known. She never asked how hard or big the job was, she just did it. No complaints, she just rolled up her sleeves and powered along. I have a hazy memory from childhood at a farewell function as she left a job at the local council where she'd worked on the maintenance team. Jennie is the hardest worker I've ever seen. I think she did the work 3 men would do in a year in half that time. This is paraphrasing. At least a decade ago, the memory only carries so much. I believed it. Mum had something to prove. That she was capable, that she was worthy. Whether she needed to prove it to others, herself, or something else I can't say. When she and Ray started their ag business, they would leave long before the sun crested the hills and often would not be home before it sunk under the horizon. Fencing, bull testing, tailing lambs, helping birth a calf, hay carting, seeding, didn't matter. They just did it. Can we start by describing a bit of what your mum was like? She had near boundless empathy and compassion. When George, a local farming patriarch who Mum loved like a father, had a cow die birthing its calf, Mum took it back to our house in town and raised it. Was this legal? Not really. Was Mum going to let a baby cow die because the law didn't like the idea of a cow being in the backyard? Absolutely not. Did she cry when she returned the cow to the herd? Of course she did. The calf was long in the line of animals that were loved and protected by Mum. Magpies with clubfoot, frogs defended from snakes, possums left to raise their babies in a nest built in our barbecue, even though it meant a summer with no barbecue. Dogs adopted, a stray cat held as it passed away. Even spiders were gently clasped in her hands to be placed in the garden outside. People were treated just as gently, even to Mum's detriment. Everyone got a second, third, fifth chance. Even when it was clear they would waste it. Even when Mum was hurt and burned, the next person would be given the same kindness and love. Mum collected a gaggle of children who were not her own. Friends would come to stay, and Mum was their mum too. Everyone was loved and hugged and mattered. What was your mum like? Loved.
We moved around a fair bit, but we were always on farming stations or properties. When Ray was first born, we were on a station close to Woburn, so between Woburn and Watheroo. 10 years later, we sort of moved more to the Wheatbelt region. Ray was into being outside, and all of our after-school activities and weekend activities were on doing adventure, you know, as kids, kid-like adventures outdoors. So we were always, the three of us, out in areas like this on the weekends with a rifle slung over a shoulder and out sort of fosking around. And we were very much rural country kids, so we never lived in any of the towns growing up. We were always on the farm, so we lived and worked on the farming properties, and Ray, from day one, that's all he wanted to do. He only wanted to be a farmer, a rural person. Never wanted to move on to the city or anything like that.
We first met Ray's parents because they worked on the farm next door. We've known him since 1987. When he came visiting with his mum and dad and with his wife Lizzie, and they were looking for somewhere to live, and we actually had a spare house on the farm, and they became our tenants and friends and part of the family for quite a few years.
Yeah, Ray was looking for somewhere to live, and we had a house that was suitable for what he needed at the time.
Like, he was 19 when we met him, and you know, looking for very cheap rent, if not less. You can tell the tale about the tank, if you like.
I mean, it was a property we, I think, recently bought and weren't familiar with what needed doing. And Ray took it upon himself to clean out a tank. He ran a power cable up to it, and we found out later he got electric shock from it and ended up flat on his back in the mud and a bit worse for wear, but luckily he got away with it, and you know, yeah. And then eventually they shifted to town, and then got involved in the church on organising camps and quite a lot of that, as well as shooting. He loved shooting. He was in the rifle club in Beverley.
And could turn his hand to anything, like resourceful, responsible.
And Ray loved the open space, and that was what he's familiar with. He liked four-wheel driving. I think he did a lot more of that later when he had a bit more freedom in town.
his involvement with the church. Like I think he taught himself or bass guitar, and Lizzie used to play the keyboard. If anything ever needed setting up, Ray was always there first and left last, that sort of thing. And then I ended up getting myself, and I got Lizzie. We got identical keyboards, and the next minute Ray presented, or both of us, he made a lovely wooden case for Lizzie and for me, which I found totally overwhelming. And I wouldn't say, I mean, it wasn't expected, but that's the sort of person he was, like generous, go the extra mile, all of the above. Yeah, and tell you a story about him on the header. Nobody, like Robert does contract harvesting.
Used to, like for many years. And nobody was allowed to drive Robert's header, nobody. You know, the neighbours would offer, or, you know, we can give you a hand, or we'll do it while you have your lunch. But Ray was allowed to drive the header. I mean, he was that type of guy, I guess, is the thing. You know, some people, you know, you watch how they operate and what they do with them, you know, within themselves. And anyway, he was driving, I think it was a weekend. And we'd got back early-ish, and I got a phone call, I think it was before mobile phones even. He'd got to the stage where he wasn't confident he got into some fairly rough country, and he was more worried about the machine, or what, looking after the machine, and he said, I can't do it, which I thought, at the time I wasn't happy, because I had to go down, I went down there and had to go, and when I got to see what conditions he was working or trying to work in, I could see why, and yeah, it was hard going, and good on him for pulling the pin when he did, because he didn't, you know, he saved probably, you know, quite a bit of time fixing up machines with bent bits of steel
and possibly fires, that sort of thing.
Yeah, fires, you know, all that type of stuff.
When you scrape something on a rock and set a spark off, so he was aware of his limitations, like, good on him. All the positives, would we want him as a neighbour? Well, yes, we've had him as a neighbour, even, you know, 20 years on, 30 years on, always willing to help.
I never heard any, you know, bad stories about him mucking up or you know, breaking something or getting ahead of himself doing whatever he was doing. Would have been a lot of sheep work, which I don't think he was a sheep person, but he would have knuckled down and did it.
He was always friendly, welcoming. Lizzie's funeral, that was the first time I'd seen Ray in a suit, and Ray was the meter and greeter at the door, and I was surprised, but he certainly honoured the mother of his children, you know, his first wife. Did a wonderful job, you know, he adored his daughters, and family man, just wanting to be involved, wanting to be part of, yeah.
Yeah, Ray was always ambitious to better himself. And I think the farm opportunity came up.
That was a joint dream of both Ray and Jennie, was to have their own property, and that they got the opportunity to do that in Beverley, so they bought a 150-acre property west of Beverley and started setting that up to be a semi-self-sufficient lifestyle for them both. So they were both married previously. They both had, Jennie had 3 kids and Ray had 2 kids. Ray's girls were teenagers at the time, and Ray and Jennie met in Beverley. They had the same ideals, you know, they had the same respect and wants out of what they wanted out of life. And yeah, they did absolutely everything together. You know, I didn't have a particularly close relationship with Ray and Jennie after they got married, but when they would come to family events, it was you could see that they were just always, you know, side by side together, never sort of too far apart, and not in a creepy way, I should say, like in a mutual, mutual aspect. I think they genuinely just adored each other. They both just wanted nothing more than to be together.
Just a couple of words that come to mind when you think you remember your dad.
Outdoors, fun, joking around all the time. I think he tried to pull pranks. Some went well, some didn't, you know. But yeah, it's hard to sift through all the memories when you got all the last 10 years of crap in there as well. It's really hard to put into words what it's been like with Jenny been missing this long. And even though we have Dad, we found Dad, it still doesn't feel like it is like the end, because we don't know exactly what happened. And where is Jenny? It's having one of them back, it's not the end to either. And it is hard knowing she's still out there somewhere. They should not be apart. It's just not right. They need to be together.
What would closure look like for you, or at least some sort of closure?
Well, I'm not really sure closure is the right word, but I would want the truth to be told. That's what I want. And I want Jenny to be found and at rest with Dad. They belong together and they should be together.
No, it completely upturns your whole life. You know, it's not like, and not to just detract from other, deaths and that, but it's not like any normal grief or anything like that, because it's just ongoing. It's continual, and you go through, moments of anger, moments of depression, and moments might last months. I think I was that far removed enough from Ray to be able to keep pushing this side of it and push the police and all that sort of thing. But for his kids and for Jenny's kids, they would have to dissociate from it just to keep going. And then the ambiguous loss, now after 10 years you sort of can put the puzzle together, but for years you wonder, like, if she's still alive somewhere, is she held against her will, all that sort of thing. So for her family in particular, and for Ray's daughters, because they were obviously connected to Jenny, there's no answer. There's no, I guess that's it. Yeah, there's no answer, and you're just waiting for one, or you're waiting for her to walk in the door, or you're waiting for her to be found, and all that sort of thing. There's no way to describe it, I don't think. I don't know. That standard grief process, it's documented, and I like to read that sort of thing so you can understand the emotions and all that sort of thing. But the final stage is acceptance, and you can't reach that stage. It's impossible without finding the person, So you continuously cycle through the rest, and you never hit that final stage. It's just, you get close to it and then you start again. So it's just a continual cycle through the stages of grief. And those are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then you don't get the acceptance. So you sit in denial for a little while, nice and little comfy spot there. I spend most of my time in the anger zone and the bargaining zone, because you think, what else can I do? And you just keep trying new and different options to try and get a resolution. Depression, have sat in there for quite some time, try not to anymore. But you never get to that acceptance, so you start again, and you start again. Raymond the Ram. One of my earliest memories is of my brother Ray teaching me to ride a bike. I must have been 5 years old, because the timing aligns with when I started pre-primary. We were living on a farm in eastern wheatbelt region at the time, around 20 k's from one horse country town called Padallan, where Dad was managing a property for a wealthy city owner. The school bus picked us up on a road that bordered the farm, which was about 1 kilometre from our house. Every morning we would pack our school bags and my two brothers and I would ride off down the road to the bus stop. My next oldest brother Mal on his bike and Ray dinking me on the back of his. Then the same ride home minus the weight of our lunch boxes every afternoon. After, most probably not very long, of this routine, Ray took it upon himself to give me a crash course in the fundamentals of bicycle dynamics, aka the stability of motion, to get this little monkey off his back. This he did one afternoon on the ride home by sitting me on his bike and pushing me off with little warning, while running behind yelling, "Keep your head up and keep pedalling," added with his signature cackle of crazed laughter. It was a quick and effective lesson, and thereafter we were a convoy of 3, although I do recall he still carried my school bag for me. I'm told this is not the only extracurricular lessons Ray took it upon himself to tutor me in early on. Before I reached school age, I was already reading and writing and my math at what was considered grade 3 level when I entered my first year of school. It would be pragmatic to acknowledge that Padallan had a total student population of approximately 80 children all up from pre-primary to grade 7, so that correlation needs to be considered and a factor applied prior to any feeling of pride. Also sobering is the fact that I'm now, 40 years on, hardly what would be considered an academic success. However, what is evident is that someone was responsible for those earliest of skills, and I'm told that someone was Ray. We had a chalkboard set up at home, and for the years before I even began attending school, Ray would come home and run his own strict headmaster-like studies with myself and Mal as his students. He was so successful in his tutelage that when I finally entered primary school, it was as if a large sea anchor needed to be deployed in order to keep my class on the same curriculum. Before you get a mental picture of a studious family of polo necks and polished shoes, note that this was a very minor part of our after-school life. What we really loved to do as kids was to run wild and free, and living on a property where the nearest neighbours were a half-hour drive away made this very easy. My fondest memories of early childhood were of when us 3 boys would jump in the old farm Land Rover and go bush. We would take a rifle and go hunting rabbits, foxes and other feral animals, or otherwise any number of big brother bush adventures were always on the cards. We were the 3 amigos, all under the age of 13, miles from anywhere, like wild feral cats loose in the outback. The first years of my life were entirely this, and that my early development. It would be no exaggeration to assume that my sit-to-stand learning as a toddler was probably carried out in the rear tray of a Series 2A Landy. Ray was always the driver, and Mal and I would stand on the back and act like navigators, banging on the roof and yelling directions like we even knew where the hell we were going. Meanwhile, Ray sped along, barely able to see over the steering wheel, 2 loose wheels in unison, cackling away to himself in the cab. Everything we did together was hard, sharp, raw, feral, and above all else, fun. When Ray started high school, he was forced to go to a boarding school since the local town didn't have the numbers to cater for the required senior teachers. He absolutely hated it and it ended a complete disaster. Within a week, he had started running away and he was often found trekking back to our home, which was over 100 kilometres away. Not long afterward, a kid a couple of years older than him tried to bully him in the cafeteria. So Ray walked up and punched him directly in the face. It didn't take long before the school thought it best for everyone's sake that he go elsewhere, and he got his wish to come home and go feral in the bush again. Later that year, Dad ended up taking a job on a farm in a different town, which had a district high school, and so there we moved. Life went back to normal for a while, school for 3 each day, then outback survival in the afternoons and weekends. I was turning 7 the following year, Mal 10 and Ray 14. It wasn't long then, of course, before Ray hit adolescence and other concerns took focus in his life. Ray was forever resourceful no matter what he applied himself to, and he was always tinkering away with some new hobby. Over his high school summer holidays, he would go and work on our older sister and brother-in-law's property to earn some money for funding. Then he'd come home and work on his projects. One such example was his CB radio station that he put together in his bedroom at home. It started as a simple setup, but quickly grew into a station to rival a primary repeater base, having built his own aerial tower out of sticks and wire in the shape and size of a 3-tiered Hills hoist. Soon he was sitting up through the night, chatting away to people all over the countryside. I can still hear him. Romeo Kilo, this is Romeo Kilo. Does anybody copy? Then someone's voice would join and they'd cackle away together all through the night. I remember he had various regular buddies, girls his age, that he met on the air. So you could go out on a limb and say that he was an early pioneer of online dating, the Romeo of the Midwest. I now sometimes wonder how life might have turned out differently for Ray had he have decided to move on from the country. He was obviously an intelligent and gifted lad, since most of what he did was self-taught. No doubt he could have ventured on with school and technology, but ultimately he wanted nothing other than to work on the land and to stay close to his family, which is what he did for the rest of his life, in one form or another, from those days on. After I left home and ventured off on my own path, and he, by then now with a young family, we didn't see each other so often. But when we did, it was just like the early days, out bush on feral adventures. We were all grown up by then, of course, but otherwise it felt the same for those short times we spent together each year. Unfortunately, our relationship turned sour about 20 years ago due to my disagreement with the way he was handling taking a new direction in his life. Yet if I was honest with myself, it was a similar direction I too had already undertaken, and in the interest of defining my own selfish boundaries rather than support him, I admonished him for it. It resulted in the Ram and I butting heads after about 13 beers 13 years ago, and that night he made the decision to never speak to me again. While over the last few years some sort of peace had been made, the fact remained that our relationship was not the same as it had been, nor how it should have been, and now will never be. Ray died in 2015, how I can only describe it as he became a victim of his own circumstances. His resourceful nature and abilities in the bush were utilised, then he was dispatched and dumped down a hole with little more thought than one of the feral animals we once hunted. To this day, the events leading to his death remain unexplained. These last 11 years have felt like being set adrift in a rudderless boat without even a sea anchor to brace for the hurricane that we're all now still within. I have had to focus on that big brother lesson on the stability of motion from many years ago in order to just remain upright. The best way to prevent yourself from falling over is to keep moving. But I have fallen over more than once despite the motions of time, and I have no doubt I will again. I miss my brother. God, I miss my big brother. The cheeky larrikin with that crazed laugh forever ingrained in my mind like fingernails on that chalkboard from 40 years ago. The truth is, I've missed him for 20 years, maybe more. My only solace is that when I look around at the life I've made now, the roots are evident from those earliest of days way back when. I now recognise that although we may have grown in different directions, each of us was always part of the other and will always be. I like to think that this was Ray's final big brother lesson for me, to be able to look back at our beginnings and be truly grateful. So now I'll try to make up for time lost and attempt to make him proud by living a life well lived, using those advantages that he first gave me. Raymond the Ram, June 1967 to March 2015. You can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. Rest in peace, bro.
What was your mum like? Loved. Not only by us, but Mum and Ray had a circle of friends who adored them. When they married in 2007, dozens of tough farm men, normally pillars of stoicism and masculinity, openly wept as Mum and Ray exchanged vows. Joe, a dear friend of Mum, had spent months collecting petals from her rose bushes and drying them out for the wedding. George, who took them under his wing, helped Mum and Ray get a home. Friends like Mark, who dropped everything and rushed out to help when the alarm was raised. Like Neil and Amor, who without being asked, stepped up and took care of the farm while the world crashed down around us. There were so many people who were happy to leap up when the moment came because Mum and Ray had always done the same. I'd like to start by asking you to describe your mum in a few words. Mum was an artist, a good one. She could paint for hours, unaware of the passing of time. Dad had come home from work at times to find Mum in the dark, unaware the sun had set, still painting. Paintings filled the house, were sold at charity auctions, were stacked in corners as the wall space ran out. She would garden, build, create in many forms. The hobby she was building towards next was welding and smithing work, metal sculptures on the artistic horizon. There was always a project on the go, a new style, a new medium to create in. Paintings were abandoned, revisited, painted over, started again. One of these pieces hangs on my wall, promised to me as I admired it from afar one year. When a bushfire threatened our house, the first thing I asked Matt, my husband, to grab was the painting. I could replace everything else, the painting not so much. Can you tell me about your mum? It gets harder to separate Mum from Ray. They were such an entwined unit that talking about one without the other feels disingenuous. I remember the day I figured out Ray really liked Mum. It was a late summer afternoon, the kind of warm, dry day that leached the water from your bones, where there was little you could do but fall into a chair and wait for the cool air to come. The golden afternoon light was casting long shadows, but on a concrete veranda, that meant very little. Across the road from where we sat was a huge pine tree, the biggest in town. At its apex, a pine cone was growing straight up into the air. Mum pointed it out and Ray grinned. Everyone knew he was about to do something reckless. I reckon I could get it for you. Ray, no, that's dangerous. Before Mum could dissuade him, he was off, running across the road and scrambling up the tree. As three kids watched in delight, cheering him on as Mum flitted around, terrified he would fall. Ray made it to the top, the needle-thin branches of the top bending over backwards under his weight. He plucked the pine cone and made his way back down, presenting his prize to Mum. She tried to look angry with him for doing something stupid, but I could see the shine of delight in both of their eyes. Tell me about your mother. Tell me a bit about Jennie. How can I just tell you a bit about her in a meaningful way? How can I tell you who Mum was, why she was loved so fiercely by so many people, and why that love still endures today more than a decade on from her loss? How can I express the truly devastating, white-hot grief of her absence that still hits like a freight train after all these years? I don't think I've figured that out yet.
This is where the story rests, for now. We'll keep sharing any updates here on the podcast feed and online when new information comes to light, because this isn't finished. And if the day comes when there are answers, where this moves toward a trial or something closer to resolution, we'll be back and tell that part of the story too. But until then, thank you for listening. If you or anyone you know has information about this case, you can contact us via our Facebook page, The Man in the Hole. It's also important to note that a $2 million reward is currently being offered for information leading to a conviction in this case. This is one of the largest rewards in Australian history, offering a powerful incentive for anyone with knowledge to come forward. If you have any information related to this case, please contact Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. Even the smallest details could make a huge difference. That number again, 1800 333 000. We acknowledge the Badimaya people of the Yamatji Nation as the traditional custodians of the lands where this episode was recorded. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their enduring connection to this unique and beautiful place. Thank you for listening to Some Kind of Closure. If you found this episode valuable, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's a quick, free way to support the show, and it really helps us reach more people. This is a fully independent production. If you'd like to support the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Just get in touch via our Facebook page. Lastly, we acknowledge the presumption of innocence for all individuals discussed in this series. Any opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers. Thanks again for listening.
We've only got one side of the story.
They were just everyday people.
We find Jenny, we will find out what happened.
And the truth will prevail.
There is nothing hidden that will not be revealed. That's the hope, isn't it, that will happen.